Keeners today. Hope everybody got the chance to grab a cup of coffee so you'll stay awake during mine. I talked to a lady this morning and she said, well, what are charismatic megafauna? And I said, well, come to the talk and see. And she said, well, it's bingo. So I'm like, we'll have a wander around today through the Pacific. We'll look a little bit above what Richard was talking about, and we'll have a look at some of the big stuff. I got the word charismatic megafauna because people are always looking at big things, right? If you think about when you go, I want to see a moose, or I want to see a grizzly bear, or a polar bear, and you've got these elk, and they've got big eyes. I always think charismatic mammals are kind of big-eyed and furry, right? We don't have too much fur on what we're going to look at today, but we'll have a look at some charismatic megafauna, mostly looking at what we've got here: turtles, sharks, rays, and the cetaceans. That's this guy down here. This is a cetacean, part of the whales and dolphins group. So, looking at the Caribbean, we've just gone through a fantastic lecture, so I'll skip through a little bit of this stuff. This acts, for all intents and purposes, biologically as an enclosed sea. So you do get migration coming in and out, but it's all of these crinkly bits along the edge here and all the way along the edge that are actually the ecologically important pieces. As Richard mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of plate movement. The plate movement and where we're going really affects where we are from an ecological perspective as well, because we're getting deepening of waters, we're getting deepening and shallowing of waters in the other areas. And if you look at some of these arrows represent, this is 1 centimeter, the length. And if you look at something out here, it's moving a long, long way in a year. So what all that results in is lots of different depths of water. As we looked this morning with Richard, we saw the shallower waters off the coast of Florida, but we're also getting shallower waters in many of the other areas, and you can see the depths here, 0 to about 8,000 meters in total. So you've got some very deep water, and then a lot of shallow water. And it's the shallow water that's the most ecologically productive. This water, particularly in the Caribbean, tends to be warmer, as we will find. And it also tends to be fairly clear. What does the clear mean? It means that the sunlight is able to penetrate down through the water, and there's a thing called a photic zone, which is where the water allows light penetration down so that it gets the active photosynthesis. And that can go down, in some cases, 100 meters, which gives us that increased depth in some of these areas. It's lovely. The sea itself moves quite a lot, and you can see here the flows in the ocean, general flows as it goes. But one of the most important things that we're looking at here are the edges of all of the islands. As you can see here, we've got orange for the coral reefs. We've got green for the seagrasses, and the seagrasses are important feed. And then you've got some darker areas that you can see with mangrove areas that are also very important ecologically that we talked about previously. So what we're doing here is we're looking at what these can do for the food chain, and what this can do from the food ecosystems on the coral reefs, which are essentially the tropical rainforest of the underwater world. But before we go on to that, I'd like to talk just quickly about the indigenous people here. The Caribbean was colonized probably about 5,000 years ago, a little bit more, and then there were several recolonizations from South America pushing out into this area later. Two main groups of people, the Tainos and the Caribs. Again, we're looking at populations. I can't find reality in any of these pictures and paintings. Similar huts to what we've seen on some of the other indigenous groups that we've got. What we're starting to get in these ones, though, is we're starting to get square huts. So this is an interesting thing. I didn't notice that until I started to do the research for this, that we've gone from the round huts to these larger square huts that probably acted as meeting places. The Caribs themselves, the people here, they were indigenous people who were in the Antilles, and they flourished until, of course, the Spanish came along. These people had advanced agriculture, so they actually farmed. You can see here you've got plantain plant here. It's a bit fuzzy, I'm sorry. They also lived on wealth from the sea, so they were fishermen of sorts, and they had complex societies, so you had a big hierarchy within the societies, and people had their own jobs. This all changed, obviously, in 1492 when Columbus showed up, but this is the other group. The other group, again, this is a little bit better of a portrayal, I believe, because it's a little bit more rudimentary. Again, one of the things that we notice in these populations is they have dogs. They've had dogs all the way through. We've seen dogs up in California, we've seen dogs through Central America, and we've got dogs now in the Caribbean. And cooking pots, clay pots. The Kalingos, or the Carib people, actually battled quite a lot with the Tainos, the previous group, and these actually were more of a warring group. They were very much skilled hunters, skilled fishermen, skilled boaters, and they actually used to, when they needed them, they'd sail across or paddle across to one of the adjacent islands, battle with the Tainos, bring some of them back and put them in as slaves for the work that they needed to do. Again, all of this changed when the Europeans arrived. When the Europeans arrived, this was decimated, the populations were decimated. There is actually a small remnant Kalingo population in Dominica. It's about all that's left of the group. Most of it was assimilated into the Spanish culture and killed off, unfortunately, by disease and war. So, they also did a bit of killing of other things. So, when humans arrived on the Caribbean islands, there were very large sloths, monkeys, these are marsupials, and about 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, there was a killing off of these species. These are very, very large sloths. They're probably the size of bigger than a grizzly bear, massive things. Unfortunately, they were not used to humans as predators, and they also tasted very good. So all of these disappeared. These are species that were killed off by the humans arriving at the population. So in the Caribbean itself, there's about 130 species in the fossil record. Going back to see these animals, and obviously these are artists' regenerations of them. Of the 130, there's 73 species survive through to today of terrestrial mammals. What we're not going to do today is we're not going to be looking at terrestrial mammals, we're going to be looking at the aquatic mammals, but we need to understand kind of a little bit of the age of the aquatic mammals. This is about estimated 450 million years ago. The sharks branched off as a group. So sharks, when they say the sharks that you see today were the ones that were 450 million years ago, that's a misnomer. The descendants that we see today were our descendants and new species of shark that began 450 million years ago. If we look on the other branches, you can see the whales branch off fairly closely here, and then the non-whales are in this group here. So we will look at manatees today, and they form in this group. Dolphins and whales here, and then the cartilaginous fish over on the side. So let's have a look at the first one that most of us fear, and I thought it was really great that we have Jaws on the TV here while we're all wanting to go swim in the ocean. Well, thank you very much, Norwegian Cruise Lines, but hey, there we go. Ever the optimist. So the sharks themselves are an interesting group. They comprise of the rays, the sharks, and they're both together as a group. And in total, there's over 1,000 species of shark and ray, which is quite phenomenal, because we don't usually think of, we think of the great whites and we think of the reef sharks and that sort of thing that we normally look at, but there's over 1,000 species of sharks and rays as we go. And here's a few of them that live in and around the Caribbean. The tiger sharks. What we will be looking at are the rays, and we'll have a look at a few of them that people really like to think about. First one we'll have a quick look at, and we want to give you a little bit of information on sharks, is that these sharks and the rays themselves don't actually have bones. There's no bones in these, so if you get flounder or something like that, it's a fish, it's got bones. If you've got shark, it's the cartilage that's like the cartilage on the bridge of your nose. That's what they're, all of the structures that support the skeleton in the inside. It's a cartilaginous skeleton with no bones at all. So when somebody says they found a bone in their shark steak, yeah, that's quite wrong. So, and the other thing is that they're great hunters, so they have generally good eyesight. And you can see here the sharks have got the eyes on the side, and they have a protective mechanism when they bite. There's an eyelid comes down to protect their eyes. It's a little bit like us sneezing. When we sneeze, we close our eyes. When sharks bite, they close their eyes as well. And then the other thing is some of them have a kind of a radar thing. They have an echolocator that they can locate fish, and they can pick up signals from fish. So they have a receptor. It's quite an interesting piece. So we would be remiss if we didn't start with this one. This is the whale shark, the biggest fish on the planet currently. They're about the size of a school bus, and they don't eat. They're not predators, they're filter feeders. They're a very slow-moving fish. They open their mouth, and I'll show you a picture of it before, and they just scoop up everything that comes along. And they have markings on the bottom and on the top, and those are like fingerprints, so you can identify individual whale sharks, should you be nerdy enough of a biologist to want to do so, by actually putting this into a computer, and you can detect that. Remember we talked about the tails on the whales, that they also have kind of fingerprint markings. Well, the whale sharks have this. I will say that they're pretty scary fish, as it sees, primarily for the size. My wife and I were snorkeling off Los Cabos, and we went to a place called La Paz to see the whale sharks. And in an area, there's a whale shark sanctuary where they do allow you to go in the water with the whale sharks. And you can swim right alongside of them. I mean, at about this distance from the whale shark. So the whale shark's swimming along quite nicely, and my wife and I are right here. And then all of a sudden, it decides to make a left turn. And I've never seen the two of us swim so fast. I think we would have got an Olympic medal for that first 10 meters to get away from this thing. But that mouth is huge, and it came towards us. Not quite like this, but that's what it actually looks like as it goes along. So they're scooping up everything. These things can swim about 7,500 kilometers a year, 5,000 miles, just to get enough food. They have to swim, then they capture the food, and they come up, and it's really incredible. And the skin on these things, on all sharks actually, feels a little bit like sandpaper. So if you touch the skin on a shark, and I was fishing and I caught a tiger shark once, and you touch the skin on the shark and it's like sandpaper. So it's quite an interesting thing. They don't have scales like fish do. They have a sandpaper type of skin on the top. So this is the other one that everybody likes to think about, the hammerhead shark. This one's fabulous. Look at all the teeth, the eyes on the end, all of that kind of thing. I mean, there's 9 species of hammerhead sharks. And this thing has got a technical term. I was asked if we could throw in some technical stuff. So This one's called a cephalofoil. Cephala means head, and foil means like wing type structure. And the hammerhead sharks all have this. And the interesting thing is that they can use this for hunting, so they bash into prey animals, they bash into prey fish, and they bash them with the head. And they can see all around their body because their eyes are on the ends of these, the part of the cephalofoil. But the interesting thing is, because of the location of their eyes, they can't see right in front of their face. So they can't actually see what's going on right here. They can see what's going on a triangle going forward. So they're quite an interesting fish. The other thing is that they have the ability, females have the ability to fertilize their own eggs. So they don't need a male in order to reproduce. It's a fascinating thing. There's a few species do this, but not many. And hammerheads also love to travel in large groups. These are all hammerhead sharks, all together as they travel around in groups. So the hammerhead's fascinating, but I thought the fact that they could give virgin births was quite an interesting piece. They're also a relatively new species. Remember we said that the sharks branched off about 450 million years ago. These are a new species. They're only 20 to 25 million years old as a group. So again, this was not the fish that emerged 25 million years ago. One of its predecessors emerged 25 million years ago, so relatively new. A few things about sharks is that they go through periods, a little bit like trees. They go through periods of good food and not so good food, or they go through periods of fast growth and slow growth. So you can actually count, for some sharks, you can actually determine the age of the shark by counting the rings on their vertebrae. You can actually do that. You can do it in fish too. They have a little thing called an otolith in the side of their head. If you break out the otolith, you can snap the otolith in half, put it under a microscope, and you can count the rings on the fish. That really works well for northern fish, so northern and southern fish, where you've got warm weather, where they're very active, and cooler weather, where they're not. Moving on to another shark, we'll just have one quick look at the ocean whitetip. This is found in the Caribbean. It's found in tropical and subtropical. It actually spends most of its time offshore, so it won't be in and around the islands, so you're not likely to get eaten by this. As Richard would say, and feel very sad. But you're not likely to get eaten by this if you're in and around the islands. It's very active, it's offshore, it spends a lot of time in deep water, and I put it in because it's interesting that after the great whites, tiger sharks, and bull sharks, it's probably the most feared shark. And it's responsible for attacks after there's a disaster. So you get people in the water when there's a ship sinks or something like that, and they've got their life jackets on, this thing will come along and attack humans. So that's where it's the feared thing. So they think this is the one that does the attacks in the water after a plane goes down or after a ship sinks. We'll be in the lifeboats. We don't have to worry about it. So, moving on to the ones that fly through the water. I love the rays. They're a fantastic thing. This one is a spotted ray. These guys, again, they're a cartilaginous fish. They don't have bones. They're very flexible. So when you start to do these, they're an odd type of fish. There's some fish, actual real fish, not sharks and rays, that are also flatfish, and they start off life vertically. So there's some of the fish that will start off life vertically, and then they gradually turn on their side and their eye migrates onto the top. The rays themselves are interesting because their eyes are on the top, and the gills and mouth generally are either on the bottom or the forward. And the stingray is actually a stinger. So you do want to be careful in and around rays, except if you're in and around this guy. This guy's the manta ray. I would be remiss if I didn't include the manta ray in the talk. This is, again, a massive fish. It's about up to 26 feet from there to there, 8 meters. They are huge things. And manta in Spanish means blanket, so you can imagine why they were called the blanket. But again, these are slow growing, slow moving, and they have highly fragmented populations. They get together to breed. But again, this is one of those fish that eats anything that gets swept into this massive mouth. It has filter plates inside, so it eats small stuff. It's not like this previous shark that's looking for something, a decent sized meal. This one eats krill, it'll eat plankton, it'll eat anything that will go through that mouth and into its stomach, and it swims slowly through the water. And again, these manta rays, they're filter feeders, and they're completely harmless to humans. The only way you're going to get hurt by this is if you get hit by this massive fin on it. And again, gills on the bottom. Oh. All right, hi everybody. I couldn't see you. Sergio. All right, we'll just continue. Richard's done this for a long time, and he says you just keep smiling and keep moving on. Okay? So if you can't see this very well because of the lights, you have to just look up here on the ones on the side because they're a little bit better. Sergio. Puede bajar la luz, por favor? Sergio, baja las house lights. Okay, we'll keep going. All right. Interesting thing about the manta rays. Oh, you're all going to disappear again now. It makes me feel less nervous.
You got this.
So the manta rays actually have the largest fish brain and per body weight. So they're quite an interesting piece. And they also have a fingerprint. On the markings on the underside of the fish is actually then they're like a fingerprint. You can actually identify individuals from these markings. So as we get to learn more and more about everything that goes on, we get to learn more and more about individual behaviors. We can tell when things move from area to area. One thing when I came across from Southampton to Fort Lauderdale, and I was on the ship crossing the Atlantic. Not speaking, I was just a regular passenger. And I kept seeing this osprey around the ship. So we're out in the middle of the Atlantic, and I kept seeing this osprey. And I thought, that's really strange. And this osprey, which is a fish-eating bird, very rare in England. And then about 3 months later, I was reading an article, and it said that there's been this this osprey has broken the record for a migration, and it's come from Europe across to South Florida. And I thought, I wonder if going along with a cruise ship counts as migration. And that one is true. That one's actually a true story. Some of my stories not so much, but that one is. So anyway, let's have a look at the cetaceans. Cetaceans are the whales and the dolphins. I mean, dolphins themselves, highly socialized. You see them in big groups. I mean, we may be lucky and see some along the way. But we'll talk about a few things about these large mammals that we see in the Caribbean. And these are the ones that everybody loves to see, the humpbacks and the grays. The humpbacks, they move from the northern Atlantic through down into the Caribbean to give birth. So December to April, they move down, and there's an area off the Dominican Republic which is protected. What was it called? It's called the Silver Bank, and you get about 5,000 of these whales will come in. I'm fortunate that in Los Cabos, when I can sit at my desk and I'm working, I can see the humpbacks blowing out in the water in front of my house or in front of my condo. So it's really interesting. And then, I know there's not a lot of connection between whales and mining. However, in this particular place, I do have a story that is true. I was working in New Caledonia on a mine called the Goro mine, which is a nickel mine that we were doing the environmental baselines for. And the mine had found this fabulous bay that they wanted to use as a port. And it was used as an indigenous fishing port and a regular fishing port, but just with small boats. But they wanted to ship out large amounts of concentrate and that sort of thing. And we had to actually design the shipping schedule to avoid the humpbacks coming into the bay to give birth to their young. So we had a closed window for about 3 months where we couldn't ship anything out of that port because it was that. So you can imagine working on a crew and their job is to sit out in the boat and count fish. Well, actually count whales. So part of my crew really had a fabulous time doing that. So just one of the other ones that we may see, if we're very, very lucky, this is the fin whale. This is a much maligned whale. It doesn't get a lot of press. Okay, everybody thinks about the blue whale because that's the big one, and this is kind of the second one. So everybody knows about the tallest building in the world, the biggest fish, the biggest mammal. This is the second largest. Again, this one is found throughout the oceans. We will, if we're lucky, see it, and it's identified by this little fin that's back here on the upper part of the belly, just in front of the tail. It's a very fast swimmer, and it's usually found in groups of 2, 3 to up to 7 individuals, not as many as the hammerhead. And then in the summer, they'll feed on the krill and everything in the northern waters, and then when they come to give birth, they starve themselves. They fast. They don't feed for the 3 or 4 months. Right? I think that's what I need after this ship. But anyway, they have 3 or 4 months where they actually don't feed as they go along. And we'd be a little bit remiss, particularly if we didn't mention this one. This is the sperm whale. Everybody loves this. It's the one that we see fighting with squid. You can see this one's got a couple of scars on its nose from probably a battle with a deep sea squid. This one's, again, around the Antilles. Dominica is a hot spot in the Caribbean, so if you are going on some of the other cruises in and around the area, Dominica is a great place to see sperm whales. And they're actually named for a white substance that they secrete. It's called spermaceti, and it's a white substance that's found in their heads. In the old days, it was used for oil lamps, lubricants, and candles. We don't use that anymore. And these are quite impressive beasts, not quite as big as the fin whale. These are about 18 meters long, what's that, 60 feet? But they weigh up to 57 tons. So they're big animals as they go down. And they primarily feed on deep sea squid and octopus. So they're diving down. They can dive down 1,000 meters regularly. They found these, they've been able to sense these at 2,800 meters. That's nearly 10,000 feet down. You think about that. That goes down 10,000 feet, has a fight with a squid, gets a bit of lunch, and comes back up to the surface again. That's pretty impressive. One of the things I love about these guys, though, is that they sleep vertically in groups. These are actually sleeping sperm whales. And they sleep just like that. And then they'll wake up, come up to the surface, and go back down again. They don't need to breathe very often. So one of the things that we don't often think about in the Caribbean are killer whales. And there's actually a population of killer whales that lives in and around the Caribbean, and they've been seen quite widely through the Caribbean. They're known as residents in the Caribbean, and mostly these feed on fish. Up on Vancouver Island, where we were earlier on in the cruise, there's 2 populations of killer whales up there. There's the residents, that feed mostly on fish, so they pick up salmon and everything coming through. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then there's a group called transients, which come on down through and they hunt mostly seals and other marine mammals. The interesting thing about the killer whales is that they've been seen all the way through. And this is one of the studies that is being carried out by the scientific population in collaboration with the general population. So you can see here, citizen science is where humans who have been out on boats, when they get back to shore, they report that they've seen a killer whale here or they've seen a different whale there. So it's very important. You can see all the blue dots are just you and I going out boating, reporting what we see, and then this helps to build up a map of where we're likely to see killer whales in the Caribbean. And I mentioned that they have kind of an echolocation system as well, so they're able to bounce waves from this particular part of the head out forward, and they can actually, in certain species, they can detect different species of salmon. And then I got looking at, and this is again, I'm going nerdy on you right now, I'm doing the ecology thing, and I got looking at the different subgroups of killer whales. And you can see each one of these is a pair, male and female, male and female, male and female, going around. But you can see they have different head shapes. So I got to thinking about, well, why would they have different head shapes? And I thought, well, these guys are all Antarctic killer whales. And where they are, they have long winters where there's no light. So they can't see to feed. And then I started to look at the size of this area at the top of their head, and it's quite pronounced if you look at it compared to this one, right? And it's quite pronounced. And so I got thinking about, there's a great study there where we could have a look at killer whales and we could look at how they bounce, and these ones have to feed in the dark, so they use that echolocation in mammals, a little bit like your bats. We've got a couple more species to look at. Bottlenose dolphin. There was a comment yesterday, I believe, from the gentleman who was commenting on the ships on the way through the Panama. These have the bulbous bow that you could see on the front of the Carnival ship as it pulled out last night. They had that like proboscis on the front. Scientists think that this is also part of it. Not only does it act as a jaw and teeth, but it has a bulbous bow so that it can swim faster itself. Now the fun dolphins, these are called the spinner dolphins. These are the guys, and these are actually called spinner dolphins. These are the ones that you see leaping out of the water, and they actually spin as they come around. Most of these are fish eaters. They can hunt in groups. They can hunt in packs. They can hunt individually. But in this particular case, they all have, again, echolocation. They click. They make clicking sounds. The group communicates with clicking sounds. And they do a great job when they're hunting as they move forward. So we'll move on to the last group. Oh no, second to last group. We'll look at the ancient turtles. They're not as old as the sharks, but they just seem old. And we'll look at a few of the ones that we see in the Caribbean. The only one we don't have in the Caribbean is this little guy down here, the flatback. We can see all of these. We're probably going to be seeing, if we see anything, the green sea turtle. That's the one that we see most of. They probably date back about 100 million years, the turtles. So it's kind of an old, relatively old species. And they're found globally. In fact, it's quite phenomenal how they go. So the green sea turtle itself get up to about 4 feet long, weigh about 300 pounds. I actually was fishing off Los Cabos and caught one of these, and I think it weighed about 100 pounds. It wasn't a big one. It was about this big. We just released it as it went along. I don't know how it got on the line because they don't eat fish. They don't eat anything that would be the bait, but it must have been just annoying it. They mostly eat algae and seaweeds. So in marine ecosystems, they're very important in maintaining the health of the seagrass areas. So that's the green one. This is the one you'll see. It's not the one that's behind the picture that somebody tried to get you a photograph in front of up in the ship itself. If you look at that sea turtle, it's actually a hawksbill. We'll have a look at the hawksbill later. But the one that everybody likes to look at is this guy, the leatherback. This thing is massive. It's up to 2 meters long, and they don't have, I don't know whether you noticed on the green sea turtle that it had kind of plates on the back of its shell. This one just has a leathery back on it. It's not something that there, it doesn't have the plates like you have. And this one wanders around the planet. It can do 10,000 miles a year, so 15,000 kilometers a year, something like that. And it's got a massive distribution globally. You know, you think of turtles, usually you think of them being in the tropics where we see them most, in and around here. But look at this, it's all the way up to north of Norway and Sweden. Phenomenal. And they eat kind of soft swimming things that swim. So they eat things like this. They have this big mouth with a lot of teeth, and they swim around in the ocean, and they'll find these soft-bodied things like jellyfish, and they just eat jellyfish, and they move on, and they find another jellyfish, and they jump on it. And these things are huge, 400 or 500 kilos, so it's a big thing. And they can also dive too. They're pretty good. They can get down 1,000 meters. So you can have one of these down 1,000 meters. A very interesting group of individuals. Now the one that you've seen up on the photo board is this guy here, the hawksbill. You can tell it by the front of it. This is having a look at the animal itself. Again, it's got plates on the back, similar to the land tortoises that you would expect. And they probably get up to about 1 meter long, and they weigh up to about 150 to 150 pounds, just about 60 to 70 kilos, the big ones. And if you look carefully at it, that's what the bill looks like. And if you look on the background that you've got there, so these ones they're omnivorous. They'll eat anything. They'll literally eat anything. They'll eat coral, they'll eat mollusks, they'll eat algae, they'll eat anything at all, small fish. So these guys just wander around the ocean eating anything that comes along, and they're very, very, very important for these guys is healthy coral reefs, because that's where you're going to get lots of food for them. And what we need to remember about the turtles, all of them, is that they need to come onto land to build their nest and lay their eggs. So obviously that opens that up to predators, it opens it up to all kinds of things, but it's very important to understand that they have to come on land, and the habitat for these guys is extensive. This is looking again, Florida up here, Cuba, and then the Antilles down here. So you can look here that there's all kinds of habitat around there. And I noticed on one of Richard's photographs where we were talking about the west coast of Cabo, when we went through the hotel to get out to the beach, when he showed the photograph of that, there were some square baskets with mesh on them. And those actually are part of a turtle protection campaign, is that when the females come on shore to build the nest, in Mexico they put a square basket over the top of it, and everybody knows to stay away. And it's a cultural thing now in Mexico. It's a really great example of where ecology has been brought to the people, and the people now take the responsibility for that. So we need to kind of take that and propagate it through the rest of the Caribbean. I think it's a fabulous thing. Fascinating thing about sea turtles is that they can sleep underwater for several hours, and they don't have to come up for breath. They slow down their heart rate. It's a little bit like a hummingbird at night. It slows down its heart rate. It's not got that flurry of activity, so that it goes into this torpor. They can sleep underwater for several hours, so if you see something that looks like a dead turtle on the bottom of the ocean, it's just probably asleep. So, last group of individuals, the manatees. These are the manatees, and the manatees have got an interesting Latin name. It's called sirena. Sirena in Spanish means the group called sirena, and that in Spanish means mermaids. Las sirenas are mermaids. So these were what was mistaken for mermaids back in the day, and many ships have been lost because of a manatee apparently. This great big thing here, this was on the red stuff. It was up in the colder waters. Unfortunately, this one was hunted to extinction. This Steller sea cow. And what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the manatees that we're going to see in the West Indies. So this is the sea cow that you see down there. There's actually 3 groups. This is a fantastic shot of the animal itself. As you can see, it's very large. You've seen them probably in Florida if you've been in and around areas in Florida. There's actually 3 groups of manatees in the Caribbean. There's the Florida one. There's one that lives in Mexico, and there's one that lives out in the Antilles off of South America. So they eat primarily plants. They're grazing along the bottom. Again, habitat loss is a big threat to these guys. They may lose habitat from development. They lose habitat from pollution because the seagrasses that they eat can be affected by that. And one of the biggest threats is they get hit, particularly off the Florida coast, is they get hit by propellers. So there's a little bit of that. So let's have a look at what we've looked at today. We've looked at sharks, dolphins, rays, and turtles. One of the things that we've got to think about here is that all of these, what I call megafauna, they're in there. Habitat loss is their biggest threat. But habitat loss is not just a threat to them, it's a threat to everything else that's around us. So as we saw coming down the coast from San Francisco to Los Angeles, lots of programs in Mexico and a lot of the Caribbean islands. We've seen planting of mangroves, we've seen lots of things that local people are doing. Local actions make big difference to all these animals. And so what we're finding now is that by taking these actions from big government programs to something that people can capture, people can really get interested in, we get a lot better habitat protection, and we got a lot better protection of these amazing animals. So, with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Sergio, you can put the lights up, please, and I'm willing to take some questions.